The mistake that changed my life. Ethan Carter never wanted to get married, especially not to an alien princess. But now, standing inside a massive golden throne room, surrounded by towering alien warriors, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. It had all started just a few hours ago. Ethan was a simple trader, traveling from planet to planet, selling rare human goods to alien markets. He had landed on Vorak 5, a rich and powerful world ruled by a warrior species known as the Draveri. These aliens were tall, strong, and covered in tough, dark red skin. Their traditions were strange, but Ethan had dealt with enough alien species to know one important rule: never offend the locals. But somehow, he had. The mistake. Ethan had been walking through the grand market of Vorak 5, admiring the floating lanterns and the strange, glowing fruits when he found himself in front of a stall selling golden ceremonial bands. They looked like beautiful rings, carved with alien symbols, glowing faintly under the twin suns. Ah, human. The merchant, a heavy-set Draveri with thick, curved horns, grinned at him. You wish to impress someone special. Ethan chuckled, picking up one of the bands. Just looking. These are nice, though. The merchant's grin widened. Then accept this as a gift, a symbol of honor and unity. Ethan hesitated. He had learned that accepting gifts in some cultures could mean different things. Are you sure? The merchant nodded eagerly. Yes, yes. Take it freely. With a shrug, Ethan slipped the band onto his finger. It glowed for a moment, adjusting to his size. A second later, the entire marketplace fell silent. Ethan looked around, confused. The Draveri around him were staring, some with shock, others with horror. The merchant had dropped his wares, eyes wide with fear. What's going on? Ethan asked, his stomach twisting. From the far end of the market, a group of heavily armored Draveri soldiers marched toward him. Leading them was a woman, tall, strong, and undeniably regal. Her dark red skin shimmered under the sunlight, her long black hair tied back in golden rings. She wore a royal crest on her chest. Ethan didn't need a translator to understand. She was important, very important. A deadly proposal. The soldiers surrounded Ethan. He raised his hands. Whoa, whoa, I didn't do anything. The woman stepped closer, her golden eyes narrowing as she looked at the ring on Ethan's finger. Then she turned to the merchant and spoke in a deep, commanding voice. The merchant dropped to his knees, shaking. Forgive me, Princess Heiress. I did not think he would accept. Princess. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at Heiress, then at the ring. Oh no, what had he done? Heiress' gaze moved to him. You have taken the ring. Her voice was calm but sharp, like a blade. Ethan swallowed. But yeah, he gave it to me. She tilted her head. And you accepted it. Willingly. Ethan hesitated. I mean, yeah. The crowd gasped. Even the guard stiffened. Heiress took a deep breath. Then, as per the laws of the Draveri, you have proposed marriage to me. Ethan's heart stopped. What? He croaked. Heiress lifted her chin. The ceremonial band is a sacred symbol of bonding. By accepting it in public, in front of witnesses, you have declared yourself as my intended mate. Ethan's brain short-circuited. He looked at the ring, then at Heiress. Wait. No, that's a mistake. I didn't know. Heiress' expression didn't change. It does not matter. The law is clear. Ethan felt the walls closing in. So, I can just give it back, right? A deep, rumbling laughter filled the air. Ethan turned to see a massive Draveri warrior approaching. His armor gleamed, his face covered in deep scars. His eyes burned with amusement. That is not how it works, human. His voice was deep and powerful. Heiress turned to him and bowed slightly. Father. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Father. As in, the king. The supreme ruler of Vorak 5 grinned at Ethan, showing sharp teeth. You have made your choice, human. You will marry my daughter. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. No offense, Your Majesty, but that's crazy. I didn't mean to propose. The supreme ruler's smile vanished. To reject the princess after proposing is the greatest insult in Dravari culture, he said coldly. There is only one alternative. Ethan's throat was dry. What alternative? The supreme ruler's eyes darkened. Death, the impossible choice. Ethan's world spun. Marry a warrior princess, or die. Heiress crossed her arms. Do not worry. I do not wish to marry you either. Ethan almost sighed in relief. Great, so we can just call this off. The supreme ruler chuckled. No, if you do not marry, then you must prove your worth in another way. Ethan didn't like where this was going. What kind of way? Heiress smirked. 3 challenges. If you survive, you may go free. Ethan rubbed his temples. He was just supposed to be buying supplies. Now he was stuck in an alien engagement with life-or-death trials. The supreme ruler grinned. You have until the next sunrise to decide. Ethan groaned. Of course I do. As the guards dragged him toward the palace, Ethan had only one thought in his mind. This was the worst day of his life. The Heiress and the human. Ethan Carter sat in a dimly lit chamber deep within the towering palace of HFY, staring at the thick metal bars of his temporary prison. His mind was still reeling from the insanity of the past few hours. 1 minute, he was browsing a market, enjoying his latest business stop, and the next, he was accidentally engaged to an alien princess. And if he refused to marry her, he'd be executed. There was a heavy clang as the door slid open. Ethan tensed, expecting guards. Instead, Princess Heiress stepped in, moving with effortless grace. Even without her armor, she carried herself like a warrior. Her golden eyes locked onto him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Ethan straightened. Princess, if you're here to tell me I'm doomed, I already figured that part out. Heiress raised a sharp eyebrow. You are strange for a human. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Yeah. I'm not the one forcing marriage at sword point. She ignored his sarcasm and stepped closer. The guards outside did not follow her in. That meant one of 2 things. Either she wasn't worried about him as a threat, or she could handle him easily if he tried anything. Ethan was willing to bet on both. Heiress studied him for a long moment before speaking again. You do not belong here. That much is clear. Ethan sighed. Glad we agree on something. Heiress' expression didn't change. But you insulted my honor, whether you meant to or not. The laws of the Dravari cannot be ignored. If my father lets you go, it would make me look weak, and weakness invites war. Ethan rubbed his temples. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, that I don't want to die here. There has to be another way out of this. Right? Heiress hesitated, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. It lasted only a second before she straightened. There is another way. Ethan perked up. I'm listening. She folded her arms. You will undergo 3 trials. If you survive, you will earn your freedom. Ethan narrowed his eyes. And if I don't? Heiress' expression didn't change. Then you die. He groaned. Of course. Why is it always death? Heiress smirked. You are fortunate. My father enjoys a good fight. He would rather see you prove yourself than be executed immediately. Ethan scowled. Define prove myself. Heiress' eyes gleamed. Strength, intelligence, and courage. These are the traits of a true warrior. If you can survive, you will be allowed to leave. Ethan frowned. Wait, you said survive, not win. Her smirk deepened. Correct. You are human. No one expects you to win. Great, that was not reassuring. Ethan leaned back against the cold wall and sighed. Okay, I don't exactly have a choice, do I? Heiress shook her head. Fine, Ethan muttered. Guess I better start figuring out how to not die. The first trial. The Beast of Vorak. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing in the Colosseum of Vorak, a massive stone arena filled with thousands of Draveri spectators. Their deep voices rumbled like thunder, eager for blood and combat. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no armor, no weapons, just the thin fabric of his worn-out trading vest and a bad feeling in his gut. Across the arena, a massive gate creaked open. The crowd roared. Ethan's blood ran cold. A hulking creature stomped forward, its thick, scaled hide gleaming under the twin suns. It had 4 muscular arms, curved black horns, and glowing red eyes. Its mouth split into rows of jagged teeth, dripping with some kind of acidic saliva that sizzled against the ground. Ethan took a slow step back. "Oh, come on," he muttered. "Why is it always a giant monster?" From the royal viewing platform, Heiress stood next to her father, watching. She gave Ethan a sharp nod. "Face the Corveth beast, human." The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. "Prove your worth." The Corveth let out a bone-shaking roar and charge. Ethan barely had time to react. He dove to the side just as massive claws slammed into the ground where he had been standing. Dust and stone flew everywhere. He scrambled up, heart hammering. Okay, think. He obviously couldn't fight this thing head-on. The Draveri were warriors. They relied on brute force. But Ethan was human. He had something they underestimated. Speed, strategy, and the ability to cheat like hell. The Corveth lunged again, fangs bared. Ethan dodged, rolling beneath its legs. The beast spun, swiping at him with its claws. Ethan ducked. "Too slow, buddy." The crowd booed at his avoidance. They wanted a fight. Ethan grinned. Time to give them a show. He sprinted toward one of the fallen spear-like bones littering the arena floor, probably remains from past contestants. He yanked it up, turning just as the Corveth charged. Timing it perfectly, Ethan sidestepped at the last second, causing the beast's head to slam full force into the arena wall. The impact shook the entire stadium. The crowd gasped. The Corveth staggered dazed. Ethan gripped the spear and, without thinking, plunged it into the beast's exposed eye. The creature let out an ear-splitting shriek and collapsed. Silence. Then, an explosion of cheers. Ethan stood there, panting, sweat dripping from his face. He had won. He turned toward the royal viewing platform, locking eyes with Heiress. She smirked. Her father, the supreme ruler, nodded in approval. The announcer's voice rang out. "The human survives the first trial." Ethan let out a breath of relief. 1 down, 2 to go. But as he wiped blood and dust from his forehead, he noticed something else. Not everyone in the royal court was happy. A group of Draveri nobles whispered amongst themselves, throwing sharp glances in his direction. Ethan frowned. Something told him that winning wasn't his biggest problem. Surviving what came next was. The trials of a human groom. Ethan Carter stood in the royal palace of Vorak 5, his body aching from the battle with the Corveth beast. His clothes were torn, his face was bruised, and he was still catching his breath. But he was alive. He had won the first trial. As the Draveri crowd roared in approval, Ethan turned his gaze toward the royal viewing platform. Princess Heiress stood tall beside her father, her golden eyes watching him with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. The supreme ruler raised a massive hand, silencing the cheers. His deep, commanding voice boomed through the Colosseum. "You have proven that you are not weak, human." He paused. "But strength alone does not make a warrior." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I figured that was too easy." Heiress' lips twitched into a slight smirk. The supreme ruler leaned forward. "Your second trial begins at moonrise. If you fail..." Ethan sighed. "Let me guess. I die." The supreme ruler grinned. Heiress tilted her head slightly and spoke for the first time. "You should rest, Ethan Carter. You will need your mind at its sharpest." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "That sounds Ominous. Vayara smirked again, turning away as the guards led Ethan back to the palace. A royal warning. Ethan was given a lavish guest chamber, which was basically a fancy prison cell. The walls were decorated with golden battle carvings, and the bed was massive, but the doors locked from the outside. He paced back and forth, rubbing his sore shoulder. So, what now? As if on cue, the door slid open. Vayara stepped inside, her black and gold robes flowing behind her. Ethan blinked. No guards this time. "You move like a ghost," Ethan muttered. Vayara raised an eyebrow. "A warrior does not announce their presence unless necessary." Ethan crossed his arms. "So, what? You here to wish me luck?" She smirked. "Luck will not help you in the second trial." Ethan frowned. "And what exactly is it?" Vayara stepped closer, her golden eyes sharp. "The trial of mind." Ethan groaned. "Great. I barely survived the trial of don't get eaten. What's this one?" Vayara glanced at the door, as if making sure no one was listening. Then she lowered her voice. "It is a test of intelligence and strategy. You will enter the labyrinth of shadows." Ethan exhaled. "A maze. Okay, that doesn't sound so bad." Vayara's gaze darkened. "This is not an ordinary maze." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Of course it isn't." She continued. "The labyrinth changes. The walls shift. The doors disappear, and within its depths lurks the ghost of Vorak." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Hold on. Ghost?" Vayara studied him. "Not a spirit. A guardian. A hunter. A being that preys on those who enter the maze. It has no form. Only shadows." Ethan let out a slow breath. "And what do I have?" "A flashlight." Vayara's lips curled slightly. "You have your mind, human. And that will decide if you live." Ethan hesitated. There was something in her tone, something different from before. "You don't want me to die," he said suddenly. Vayara's expression remained unreadable. "It would be disappointing." Ethan blinked. "That's the nicest thing you've said to me all day." She turned to leave but stopped at the doorway. Without looking back, she spoke softly. "There is always a way out, Ethan Carter, even when you cannot see it." Then she was gone. Ethan stared after her, not cryptic at all. The trial of mind. The labyrinth of shadows. Moonrise came too fast. Ethan stood at the entrance of the labyrinth of shadows, staring into the pitch-black corridors stretching before him. The Supreme Ruler's voice echoed. "You have until the sun rises to escape. If you fail." Ethan sighed. "I know. I die." The Supreme Ruler nodded, pleased. "Then begin." The doors slammed shut behind him. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped inside. The first move. The walls were cold and smooth, made of an obsidian-like material. Dim blue torches flickered along the edges, casting eerie shadows. Ethan moved forward cautiously. Then, a low growl. He spun. Nothing. His pulse quickened. The ghost of Vorak. Ethan pressed forward. He reached a fork in the path, left or right. He hesitated. Something was wrong. Then he remembered Vayara's words. "There is always a way out, even when you cannot see it." Ethan turned upward. The ceiling wasn't smooth. It had handholds. He grinned. "You sneaky genius." He climbed. As soon as he pulled himself up, the entire floor vanished. Ethan stared down in horror. If he had taken either path, he would have fallen. A whispering voice hissed through the air. "Clever. Human." Ethan froze. The shadows moved. The ghost of Vorak was real. And it was hunting him. The hunter in the dark. Ethan moved fast, leaping across broken pathways, dodging shifting walls that tried to trap him. He could feel it. The shadows stalked him, slithering along the walls, watching. Ethan reached another dead end. The whispers grew louder. Then, a swipe of darkness lashed out. Ethan barely ducked in time, rolling across the stone floor. A clawed shadow slashed the air where he had been. Okay, Ethan gasped. I get it. You're the big bad. No response. Just laughter. Then a voice whispered, not strong, not worthy. Ethan's fists clenched. Yeah. He stood tall. Well, I'm still alive, and I don't plan on changing that. The shadows lunged. Ethan had one chance. He grabbed a broken torch from the ground, ripped off the fabric, and threw the flame into the air. For a split second, the entire chamber lit up, revealing the massive, formless beast of shadows surrounding him. Ethan grinned. Found you. And he ran straight through. The final test. The exit was ahead, a massive stone archway. The shadows raged behind him. The ghost of Vorak shrieked, closing in. Ethan pushed forward, every muscle screaming. He leaped. Light. And then silence. Ethan collapsed onto the cold ground outside the labyrinth. The sky was turning gold. Sunrise. The supreme ruler stared down at him. The crowd erupted. Heiress smirked from the royal platform. Ethan gasped. So, did I win? The supreme ruler chuckled. The human survives. Heiress' gaze lingered on him for a second longer than necessary. Ethan sat up. 2 trials down. 1 more to go. And he was starting to realize something. Princess Heiress wasn't just testing him. She was watching him. And Ethan had a feeling this wasn't just about survival anymore. A deadly deal and an unexpected connection. Ethan Carter sat in the grand banquet hall of the Draveri Palace, bruised, exhausted, and very much alive. He had survived 2 impossible trials, a battle with a monstrous beast and a labyrinth filled with shifting walls and a shadowy hunter that wanted him dead. Now only one final trial stood between him and freedom. The problem. Something had changed. The supreme ruler sat at the head of the long table, watching Ethan with sharp, calculating eyes. Princess Heiress sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Other high-ranking nobles filled the room, whispering among themselves. Some of them looked impressed by Ethan's survival. Others, not so much. Ethan took a cautious sip of the strange, glowing drink in front of him. He had learned his lesson. Don't blindly accept anything on this planet. The supreme ruler finally spoke. You have done well, human. Ethan set down his cup, meeting his gaze. So I've heard. The ruler smirked. Tomorrow, you will face your final trial. Should you survive, you will be free to go. Ethan exhaled. And what exactly does this last test involve? Wrestling a warlord. Fighting a dragon. Heiress' lips twitched. The supreme ruler's grin widened. No, this will not be a test of strength or intelligence. Ethan frowned. Then what? The supreme ruler leaned forward. It will be a test of loyalty. Ethan's stomach twisted. That sounded way worse than fighting monsters. A secret warning. After the feast, Ethan was led back to his lavishly decorated golden cage, the guest chamber where he had been staying. But before the guards could lock the doors, a familiar figure slipped inside. Princess Heiress. The guards hesitated. Then, with a silent nod from her, they stepped back and left the 2 of them alone. Ethan folded his arms. You really need to start knocking. Heiress ignored his sarcasm. The 3rd trial is not what you think. Ethan's muscles tensed. Yeah, I got that impression. She stepped closer. It is a test of loyalty to the throne. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Loyalty? To who? Heiress hesitated for the first time since he had met her. To my father. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Heiress' gaze locked onto his. You will be given a choice, and no matter what you choose, someone will want you dead. Ethan let out a breath. That's not exactly reassuring. Heiress glanced at the door before lowering her voice. There are those in the palace who do not want you to leave alive. Ethan's stomach dropped. Why? She studied him carefully. Because you are Unexpected. Ethan blinked. That's a new way of saying nobody likes me. Heiress shook her head. You misunderstand. You have done what no human has ever done before. You have earned respect. Ethan frowned. And that's a problem. Heiress' golden eyes darkened. For some, yes. He exhaled. Great. So, what do I do? For a long moment, Heiress didn't answer. Then she said, Trust no one. And with that, she was gone. Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. He had a very bad feeling about tomorrow. The final trial. A choice that could kill him. The next morning, Ethan was led into the great hall of judgment. The supreme ruler sat on his golden throne, surrounded by dozens of Dravari nobles and warriors. Heiress stood to his right, her expression unreadable. A guard stepped forward and handed Ethan a blade. Ethan frowned. What am I supposed to do with this? The supreme ruler leaned forward. Your final test is simple. 2 figures were dragged into the center of the hall. Ethan's breath caught. One was a Dravari warrior, bound in chains. The other, a human traitor, just like him. The supreme ruler spoke, his voice heavy. One of these men has committed treason. Ethan's grip tightened around the blade. The supreme ruler continued. To prove your loyalty, you must execute one of them. Ethan's heart pounded. Wait, what? The supreme ruler's eyes gleamed. You must choose. One will die, and one will live. Show us where your loyalty lies. Ethan's pulse raced. He glanced at Heiress, searching for any sign of what the hell he was supposed to do. Her expression didn't change. But then, ever so slightly, she shook her head. A warning. This was a trap. If he chose the Dravari, the humans would see him as a traitor. If he chose the human, the Dravari would see him as weak. No matter what, he was dead. Ethan took a slow breath. Think, there is always a way out. And then, he had it. He stepped forward, holding the blade carefully. The entire room was silent. He lifted it high, and then flung it to the ground. Gasps echoed through the hall. Ethan stood tall. I won't kill anyone. The supreme ruler's expression darkened. You refuse. Ethan met his gaze. Yeah, I refuse. A long, heavy silence followed. The nobles whispered among themselves. The supreme ruler studied him, his expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like forever, he laughed. The deep, rumbling sound filled the chamber. I knew you would say that, the supreme ruler finally said. Ethan frowned. Wait, what? The ruler leaned back, grinning. The final trial is a test of true character. Strength and intelligence can be taught, but what cannot be taught is the heart of a warrior. Ethan exhaled slowly. The supreme ruler rose to his feet. You have passed the 3 trials, human. He smiled. You are free. The crowd erupted into cheers. Ethan let out a breath of relief. It was over. A dangerous proposition. Later that evening, Ethan stood on the royal balcony, staring at the twin suns of HFY. He was alive. He was free. And yet, something felt unfinished. Footsteps approached. He didn't need to turn. You're getting predictable, princess. Heiress smirked. And yet you are still standing here. Ethan glanced at her. So what now? I just leave. Heiress' golden eyes held something new, something unreadable. You could, she said. Or, Ethan raised an eyebrow. Or, Heiress stepped closer. You have proven yourself. There is a place for you here, if you want it. Ethan hesitated. He had fought so hard to survive. But now, walking away felt like the hardest thing to do. For the first time, he wasn't sure what he wanted. Heiress smirked. Think about it, Ethan Carter. And with that, she was gone. Ethan exhaled. This wasn't over. Not even close. Betrayal in the palace. Ethan Carter had survived the 3 trials of HFY and earned his freedom. But freedom, it seemed, was far more complicated than he had expected. He stood on the grand balcony of the Draveri Palace, staring out at the alien city below. Towers of gleaming obsidian and gold stretched into the sky, while streets pulsed with the light of floating energy orbs. He should have been relieved. He should have been on the first ship out of here. Instead, his mind raced with the offer Princess Heiress had made him the night before. "There is a place for you here, if you want it." Ethan wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that he was considering it, or the fact that he didn't want to leave. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You seem troubled, human." Ethan turned to see Heiress, dressed in elegant dark armor, standing in the shadows of the balcony. Her golden eyes studied him, sharp as ever. Ethan sighed. "I just realized something. I've fought so hard to stay alive, but I don't know what to do now that I've won." Heiress tilted her head slightly. "You are free. That is what you wanted, is it not?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, I guess." She studied him carefully. "You do not sound certain." Ethan let out a breath. "Because I'm not." He turned toward her. "What if I stayed? What would that even look like?" Heiress smirked. "It would look dangerous." Before Ethan could respond, a loud explosion rocked the palace. The attack on the throne. Ethan and Heiress spun as the floor beneath them trembled. Shouts and alarms filled the air. A second later, a blazing red blast tore through one of the palace walls, sending debris raining down. Ethan instinctively grabbed Heiress' wrist and pulled her back as a massive chunk of black stone crashed onto the balcony where they had just stood. From the lower levels, warriors in dark armor poured into the palace, their weapons glowing with energy. Ethan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just an attack. This was a coup. Heiress cursed under her breath. "The war clans." Ethan blinked. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a blade from the nearby wall and tossed it to him. "Fight now," she ordered. "Ask questions later." Ethan caught the blade just as the first wave of attackers burst into the royal chambers. Betrayal from within. Ethan ducked as a plasma bolt whizzed past his head, searing the air. He spun, slashing his blade across the nearest attacker's armor. The warrior staggered but didn't fall. These weren't ordinary palace guards. They were trained killers. Heiress fought beside him, her movements fluid and deadly. She cut through the enemy with precision, her golden eyes burning with fury. But even as they fought, Ethan could see something worse. The supreme ruler was missing. Heiress saw it too. Her face darkened. "They're after my father." Ethan blocked an incoming strike. "Then we better move fast." They fought their way through the burning corridors, past fallen warriors and shattered walls. The deeper they went, the worse the battle became. And then at the entrance to the Great Hall, they saw him, the supreme ruler, bound in chains. Ethan froze. What the hell? A group of high-ranking nobles stood around him. But they weren't here to rescue him. They were leading the attack. Heiress' breath caught. No. A tall figure stepped forward, dressed in dark robes and royal armor. High Lord Kale, one of the supreme ruler's most trusted advisors, and apparently the traitor. Kale smirked. "Heiress, how unfortunate. You should not have survived the trials." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Kale ignored him. "The age of your father is over, princess. The war clans do not need a ruler who shows weakness." Heiress' hands tightened into fists. "You dishonor the throne." Kale smirked. "The throne does not belong to the weak." He turned his gaze toward Ethan. "And you, human." His expression darkened. "You should not be alive." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, you and about half the people I've met here seem to think that." Cal's voice hardened. "You are an embarrassment, a foreigner who was supposed to die in the trials. Instead, you made our princess look foolish." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I thought I made her look impressive." Vayara's lip twitched, just barely. Kale glared. Enough. Kill them. The enemy rushed forward. Ithan sighed. Man, I really hate this place. And then the real fight began. The battle for the throne. The hall erupted into chaos. Ithan and Vayara fought back to back, defending the supreme ruler as Kal's warriors closed in. Ithan dodged a spear thrust, using his smaller size to his advantage. These warriors were powerful, but they were trained to fight other Dravari, not humans. Ithan grabbed a fallen energy blade, activated it, and spun into the nearest enemy, cutting him down. Vayara moved like a storm, her golden armor flashing as she slashed through enemy after enemy. But Kale was watching, waiting. And then he moved. Kale lunged at the supreme ruler, blade in hand. Vayara turned. Too late. Ithan saw it happen before he could stop it. Kale's blade pierced the supreme ruler's chest. Vayara let out a furious roar. Ithan acted without thinking. He threw his weapon. The blade buried itself in Kal's shoulder. The traitor staggered back, roaring in pain. Vayara charged, tackling him to the ground. Ithan rushed to the supreme ruler's side, catching him as he collapsed. The older warrior coughed, blood staining his golden robes. His eyes locked onto Ithan's. He struggled for breath. You are not like the others. Ithan clenched his jaw. Stay with me, old man. The supreme ruler let out a weak chuckle. The throne. He turned to Vayara. It is yours. Vayara's breath hitched. Father. His eyes closed. Silence. Ithan let out a slow breath. Damn it. Kale growled, struggling against Vayara's grip. This is not over. Vayara stood. Her voice was like steel. No. She raised her blade. It is. And with one final strike, Kale fell. The aftermath. The battle was over. The traitors were dead or captured. Ithan stood beside Vayara as she looked down at her father's body. He hesitated, then said, I'm sorry. Vayara closed her eyes. When she looked at him again, something had changed. You saved my father's honor, she said quietly. Ithan exhaled. Didn't save his life. Vayara studied him. You fought for this throne when you did not have to. You proved yourself. Ithan swallowed. Yeah. What now? Vayara's golden eyes burned. Now. She took a deep breath. Now, I take the throne. The war for the throne begins. Ithan Carter had seen war before. He had fought for his life, dodged death in impossible trials, and faced enemies who wanted him dead simply for existing. But this was different. This was a war for a throne. The coronation that never happened. The supreme ruler was dead. The news spread through Vorak 5 like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the kingdom. Traditionally, the throne would pass to his only daughter, Princess Vayara. But things were never that simple. The Dravari, proud warriors that they were, followed a brutal system. Strength was everything. If a ruler was seen as weak, they could be challenged. And that was exactly what was happening now. Instead of a peaceful coronation, Vayara's claim to the throne was immediately contested. The war clans, who had secretly backed High Lord Kel's coup, were not done fighting. They wanted control. And to them, Vayara's rule was a threat. They saw her choice to spare Ithan as a sign of weakness. They believed her tolerance of humanity had made her soft. And so, they declared war. A new kind of battle. Ithan stood at the royal balcony, watching the city below. Dravari warriors gathered in the streets, preparing for war. Hundreds of soldiers, dressed in dark red armor, lined the palace walls. Meanwhile, the war clans had begun to mobilize their forces in the outer districts. Ithan exhaled. I knew something like this would happen. Beside him, Vayara's golden eyes burned with fury. They think I am weak, she said coldly. They believe I will let them take my father's throne. Ithan glanced at her. You won't. She turned to him. "No, I will not." Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see something beneath the surface. Grief. She had lost her father, and now, instead of mourning, she had to fight for her life. Ethan folded his arms. "So what's the plan?" Vayara hesitated. "The war clans expect me to follow tradition. They believe I will meet them on the battlefield." Ethan frowned. "And?" She met his gaze. "I will not." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Vayara smirked. "They think like warriors. I will think like a ruler." Ethan liked that answer. A dangerous gamble. Later that night, Ethan sat in the war room, surrounded by Dravari generals and commanders. A massive holographic map of HFY flickered above the table, showing enemy troop movements. One of the older commanders growled, his heavy fists slamming against the table. "The war clans outnumber us. If we fight them head-on, they will crush us." Another general nodded grimly. "We must call for reinforcements." Ethan leaned back. "Do you have reinforcements?" Silence. Vayara answered, "Not enough." Ethan sighed. "Then fighting them in open war is a bad idea." One of the commanders scoffed. "We are warriors. We do not run from battle." Ethan shot him a look. "Then you're gonna die in one." The general growled, but Vayara raised a hand, silencing him. Ethan studied the map. "Okay, we can't fight them directly. But what if we don't have to?" Vayara's eyes gleamed with interest. "Go on." Ethan pointed to the outer city districts, where the war clan strongholds were located. "What if we don't hit them on the battlefield? What if we take the fight to their home?" The room went silent. One of the commanders frowned. "You suggest an infiltration mission?" Ethan grinned. "Exactly. Instead of wasting time in a long war, we hit them before they can attack." Vayara nodded slowly. "Strike first. Remove their leadership. End the war before it begins." Ethan leaned forward. "It's risky. But it's better than getting slaughtered in open combat." Vayara smirked. "I like it." The commanders exchanged glances. Then, slowly, they nodded. The plan was set. Tomorrow, they would end this war before it started. The infiltration begins. The next night, Ethan found himself in full Dravari armor, crouched on the edge of a high rooftop. Vayara was beside him, her twin blades strapped to her back. Below them, the main war camp of the war clans was filled with hundreds of soldiers, preparing for an attack on the palace. Ethan took a slow breath. "Remind me again why I agreed to this." Vayara smirked. "Because you enjoy staying alive." Fair point. Their mission was simple: assassinate the enemy leaders before they could organize their forces. If they could take out the war clan's top generals, the entire rebellion would collapse. Vayara motioned to Ethan. "Stay close." Then, without another word, she leaped off the rooftop. Ethan groaned. "Yeah, sure. Let's just jump off buildings." And he followed. The silent war. They moved like ghosts, slipping through the shadows. The enemy camp was filled with battle-ready warriors, but none of them expected an attack inside their own territory. Ethan and Vayara worked fast. One by one, they eliminated enemy leaders, moving through the war camp like a silent storm. Then, just as Ethan took down another high-ranking commander, something went wrong. An alarm sounded. The war clans had discovered them. Vayara cursed. "We have to go. Now." Ethan glanced behind them. Dozens of enemy soldiers were closing in. "Yeah," he muttered. "I noticed." They ran. Blades clashed behind them. Plasma bolts whizzed past. Ethan dove behind cover, returning fire with a stolen Dravari weapon. Vayara cut through enemy warriors with deadly precision. But there were too many. Ethan gritted his teeth. "We need an exit." Vayara scanned the battlefield, then pointed to a damaged supply ship. "There." Ethan nodded. "Great. Now we just have to not die before we get there." They fought their way to the ship, dodging blasts and narrowly escaping death. Ethan slammed the controls, firing up the engine as Vayara leaped inside. The ship roared to life. They blasted into the sky, escaping just as the war clan's camp erupted into chaos. Below them, the enemy forces fell apart. The war had ended before it had truly begun. The throne is hers. Back at the palace, the victory was celebrated. The war clans had been defeated. The rebellion had collapsed. And the next day, Vayara was crowned as supreme ruler of HFY. Ethan stood beside her as the golden crown was placed on her head. The crowd roared in approval. Vayara turned to him. "This is your victory, too." Ethan smirked. "I just wanted to stay alive." Vayara's golden eyes softened. "And yet, you did far more." Ethan exhaled. "So, what now?" Vayara studied him. "That depends." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "On." Vayara smiled. "On whether you plan to stay." Ethan hesitated. For the first time, he had a choice, and he didn't know what he wanted. The final choice. The war was over. Ethan Carter stood on the royal balcony of HFY, staring out at the alien city below. The skies, once filled with smoke and warships, were now clear. The distant sound of battle had faded, replaced by cheers of victory from the people. The war clans had been defeated. The rebellion had collapsed before it could truly begin. And now, Vayara was queen, the supreme ruler of HFY. Ethan exhaled slowly. He should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was uncertainty. For the first time in his life, he had no idea what came next. The new queen. The coronation ceremony had been grand. Thousands of Draveri warriors filling the great hall, chanting Vayara's name as she stepped forward in her new golden armor. The moment the crown was placed upon her head, the entire kingdom had roared in approval. Ethan had stood beside her, watching as the last remnants of her father's rule faded away, replaced by something new. And now, standing beside Vayara in the quiet of the night, Ethan realized something. She wasn't the same person she had been when they first met, and neither was he. Vayara turned to him, her golden eyes glowing under the twin moons. "You look troubled, Ethan Carter." Ethan let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, well, I've had a long few weeks." She smirked. "That is an understatement." They stood in silence for a moment. Then, Vayara's expression softened. "You have done much for HFY, more than any outsider ever has." Ethan sighed. "Yeah. And now I don't know what to do with myself." Vayara studied him carefully. "You always speak of leaving, of returning to your home among the stars." Ethan hesitated. She was right. That had been his plan. Survive. Escape. Leave this planet behind. But now he wasn't sure if he wanted to. Ethan met her gaze. "You think I should stay?" Vayara smirked. "I think you should decide that for yourself." She stepped forward. "But if you do stay, I will not stop you." Ethan swallowed. "And if I leave?" Vayara's expression was unreadable. "Then I will not stop you either." She was giving him a choice. And for the first time since stepping foot on this planet, Ethan realized something. He wasn't trapped anymore. He was free. The offer. Later that night, Ethan found himself in the royal war room, staring at a star map. His ship, his ticket home, was already being prepared for launch. But something held him back. The war was over, but trouble was never far away. Vayara's rule was still new, and not all of the nobles were happy about it. Ethan knew there were still enemies lurking in the shadows, and if he left, would she be safe? The thought bothered him more than he expected. Lost in thought, Ethan turned to see General Tavik, one of Vayara's most loyal commanders, watching him. Ethan smirked. "Something like that." Tavik folded his arms. "You are not like other humans." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. And what are other humans like?" Tavik chuckled. "Weak. Predictable." He nodded toward Ethan. "You are neither." Ethan shook his head. And yet, I'm still trying to figure out if I should leave or not." Tavik studied him. Then, after a moment, he said, "The queen trusts you." Ethan's smirk faded. "Yeah, I know." Tavik stepped closer. "If you stay, you could do great things for this kingdom." Ethan exhaled. "And if I leave?" Tavik's expression darkened. "Then you must hope the queen survives without you." Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew the truth. If he left, Heiress would face her enemies alone. The decision. The next morning, Ethan stood in the royal hangar, staring at his ship. The ramp was open. The controls were ready. He could leave. Heiress stood beside him, silent. Ethan glanced at her. "So, this is it." Heiress nodded. "It seems so." Silence. Ethan hesitated. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Heiress smirked. "You are terrible at goodbyes." Ethan laughed. "Yeah, I really am." Another pause. Heiress' expression softened. "If you leave, I will not hold it against you." Ethan swallowed. "And if I stay?" Heiress tilted her head. "Then you will never be just an outsider again." Ethan let out a breath. He looked at his ship, then at the palace, then back at Heiress. And he made his choice. The future of Vorak 5. Later that night, the city of Vorak 5 was alive with celebration. The people cheered in the streets, celebrating their new queen and the end of war. And at the heart of the palace, standing beside Heiress as she watched over her kingdom, was Ethan Carter. He had chosen to stay, not because he had to, not because he was trapped, but because, for the first time in his life, he belonged. Heiress glanced at him, her golden eyes gleaming. "You made the right choice," she murmured. Ethan smirked. "I hope so." She tilted her head. "You will not regret it." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, I think you might be right." And as the twin moons shone down on the new rulers of Vorak 5, Ethan realized something. His real adventure was only just beginning.